Section 23 of Music by Ursula Creighton. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 23, Verdi. Contemporary with Wagner was another great composer of operas, Giuseppe Verdi, 1813 to 1901. Like Wagner, he learned much from Mozart's Don Giovanni, for Wagner admired this opera above all others, and Verdi, at the age of 18, was given it as a daily study by his master. To appreciate and fully enjoy a great opera is not purely a pastime. Only by degrees can a listener hear the various beauties, and the less obvious ones probably last of all. At a first hearing of Mozart's masterpiece, Don Giovanni, the listener probably most enjoys the few clear melodies, such as La ci darem la mano, and perhaps something of the light humor of Leporello, which seems to add a depth of simple sincerity to the whole work. It is not until one is fully acquainted with the music that one can follow all through the recitative with its quick-moving emotion and realize the delineation of the characters and the moments of pure melody coming, as it were, from a background of equally passionate and moving, though less easily remembered music. Verdi wrote many operas, the earlier ones less gifted, but with far more obvious melodies, though less closely compact than his later works. In his earliest works, it is indeed the melodies that matter, and almost nothing else. As Verdi's powers grew, his work grew in interest, and not only beautiful melodies, but other lovely effects of feeling bind together his later operas, such as Rigoletto, until in Falstaff we reach an opera where the melodies and solos are not so important as the character of the persons of the opera as they are displayed in the music and the quick-moving scenes of humor and delicacy. Verdi was one of the great Italians who lived under Austrian tyranny, and though he did not suffer from it politically, it affected his work. The police sometimes interfered and refused to allow his operas to be produced, and sometimes his librettos had to be changed. The authorities tried to prevent any occasion for outbursts of Italian patriotism, but Verdi in his works wrote stirring popular melodies to words which woke patriotic fervor in his hearers, and many were the scenes in Milan and Venice when, after a great aria containing such suggestive words as Cara Patria, Resti l'Italia a me, the audience became almost frenzied with excitement. The applause developed into a roar, and every portable thing, papers, hats, books, flowers, fans, and even sticks, were thrown from one part of the house to another. For 10 years in that time of struggle, Verdi was a national force. Even his name was a watchword, and Viva Verdi, shouted by an audience and placarded in the streets, stood in the minds of Italian patriots for Viva Victor Emmanuel Re d'Italia, the king to whom their hearts turned to unite their country and drive out the hated Austrians. The story of Verdi's early life is moving and interesting. He was the son of poor parents who kept a little shop at a village called Roncole, near Busseto, and not far from Parma, in northern Italy. Very little money was spent on his education. His parents noticed that whenever a barrel organ came to their town, the little Verdi followed it as far as he could to listen to the tunes. While he was still young, they obtained a spinet on which he picked out scales and chords, and such was his passion one day at being unable to find again a chord he had sounded with pleasure the day before, that he took a hammer and began breaking the spinet. The same spinet stood in a room of the villa where he died, and written inside is an inscription from an old workman who had mended it for love and not for pay, because the boy played so well. When 10 years old, Verdi became the organist at Roncole, while he was being taught simple lessons at the neighboring town of Busseto for 3d. a day. Busseto took a pride in Verdi. A leading citizen, Barezzi, employed him, and later on he married Barezzi's daughter. The charitable funds of the town provided money for him to go and study in Milan, and the townspeople brought him back when their organist died to conduct their Philharmonic Society. After 5 years, Verdi returned to Milan, this time with his wife. There he lived very simply with his family, a baby son and daughter, and there he obtained a commission to write 3 operas, the work he most wanted to do. But while writing, the great tragedy of his life happened. In just over 2 months, his 2 children and his wife were taken ill and died, and his home was left empty. The opera, for which a comic libretto had been given him, was a failure, and Verdi wished to tear up his agreement and never write again. The conductor who had given him the commission met him, however, one day and asked him to read a libretto he had, which he considered poetical and beautiful, the story of Nebuchadnezzar. Almost against his will, Verdi read short passages of the story, and moved by the beauty of the words, began slowly to write. The opera was produced during Carnival, and was his first great success. Verdi always lived retired from the world. He bought a little villa near Busseto, where he lived very quietly. Honors were showered on him in his later years. He was offered a title when Italian freedom came, but he refused it. Cavour made him accept a place as member of Parliament. Later the king made him a member of the Senate, but Verdi never used his position in either capacity. He attended once, and that was all. He married again, a famous singer, Madame Strepponi, but had no more children. He composed constantly. He wrote nearly 30 operas, as well as his famous Requiem, and a few other religious and instrumental works which are now not heard. The most famous of his operas, which are still often given, are Rigoletto, La Traviata, Il Trovatore, Aida, Otello, and Falstaff. Rigoletto was an adoption of a story by Victor Hugo called Le Roi s'amuse. Aida was commissioned by the Khedive of Egypt to inaugurate the new Italian theater at Cairo. Verdi was paid £4,000 for the opera, which was produced in Cairo in 1871. The melodies in many of his operas, particularly Il Trovatore, were so popular that they traveled all over the world on barrel organs. One melody in Rigoletto, La Donna è mobile, Verdi himself thought so likely to attract popular applause that he did not even write it down until a few hours before the opera was produced. Such melodies brought Verdi money and fame, but this alone would not have made him what he was, one of the greatest writers of true opera. For a beautiful melody is but a part of an opera which contains many and varied strands of interest, held together by their truth to the story and their power of lighting up the moments of the drama as it unfolds. Verdi's power of writing vigorous, attractive melody he always possessed, and his early operas were produced so long ago that they preceded the early operas of Wagner. Those early operas do not, however, give any impression of how great a musician he could be. He continued to develop his latent powers throughout his long life. He developed picturesque power in his music, dramatic feeling, and a power of drawing character without losing his wonderful gift of melody, until his works expressed undreamed-of beauties. Falstaff, written when he was 80, is full of a spirit of youth and fun. The most complicated pieces sound simple, for Verdi was a complete master of the art of writing counterpoint and could write a fugue with amazing skill, sounding not as we might expect a fugue to sound, perhaps rather dry and complicated, but full of melody and gaiety. He was also one of the few composers who was a complete master of the orchestra, and his later works show extraordinary imaginative beauty. End of section 23 of Music by Ursula Creighton. Read by Martha Weller, Champaign, Illinois, March 30th, 2024.